Hello. Right, now time to turn to the press preview, which is a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. And it's now time to see what's making the headlines with Sky's political commentator, Salma Shah. And we're also joined by the political editor of the HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield. Good to have you both with us. They'll be with us now from now until just before midnight. So lots of time to talk through the news. And let's have a quick look first, shall we? Let's have a look at what is on some of those front pages as they come in. The Queen was like everyone's grandmother. The Express leads with what the Prince of Wales told one mourner at Sandringham today. Staying at Sandringham, the Metro reports on the emotional toll the Queen's death has had on Prince William. Walk behind Queen's coffin brought back memories of my mother's funeral. The Daily Mail also dedicates its front page to the Prince's words today. And the Telegraph has some new details concerning the Queen's funeral, which will be, of course, on Monday, with NHS doctors and nurses set to walk in front of Her Majesty's coffin. The Sun says that Prince Harry will wear his military uniform when he stands vigil in front of the Queen's coffin in the coming days. And the Mirror reports on the funeral of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt, who, of course, was shot by a gunman who broke into her home in Liverpool last month. The Financial Times has word on that meeting between Vladimir Putin and the Chinese president, where Mr. Putin admitted for the first time that Beijing had concerns over Russia's war in Ukraine. And The Guardian's top story focuses on the Prime Minister's plans to lift a ban on fracking, which the paper says comes despite an apparent lack of progress on limiting the risk of earthquakes caused by the practice. Pray for the poor millionaire bankers. That is the Daily Star, which leads with news that the Chancellor wants to scrap the cap on bankers' bonuses. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen during the programme, you can also check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us digest them as well. And as I said before, we are joined by Sky's political commentator, Salma Shah, and political editor of HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield. Really good to have you with us from now till just before midnight. Great stuff. Let's have a look, shall we? A lot of the papers, starting with the Daily Express, are focusing on Prince William's words. It was really quite emotional from him, wasn't it? It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing, really, that he's out there and he's obviously having to lead the charge now that he is Prince of Wales. And really capturing that sentiment that a lot of people say, you know, the Queen was like everybody's grandmother. I mean, I can't say that I can particularly relate to it, but that kind of like sense of that national figure. But also, interestingly, people feeling, especially, you know, with the line of people going through Westminster Hall here, that sense of sort of delayed grief from the pandemic and things like that. So, you know, that sense of a familiarity almost with that figure, not just because she's our queen, or was our queen, but also because of people that we may have lost, you know, through the last couple of years. So really capturing that sentiment, I think.
I think a lot of people were probably quite surprised by how emotional they felt. I was quite taken aback by it, actually, when the news came through. It just felt quite untethering somehow.
Yeah, I think it's because, obviously, she's been part of all our lives. Yeah. I mean, you have to be very old, basically, not to remember when she wasn't the monarch. And, yeah, I mean, someone is in your life, even if you don't know them, and they're a distant figure, but you see them on the TV, they're just, as you say, a presence, they're always there. And when suddenly that's gone, I think, yeah, it surprises you and it upsets a lot of people. And, you know, you see it when you look at the live feed of the Lion in State. I think a lot of people, if you see them coming through, they probably don't know how they're going to react until they actually get there. And you see some people are crying, others bow their heads, others blow kisses, bless themselves. You know, it stirs up all sorts of emotions that people just don't expect, I think.
It is interesting. In talking about how the Queen was like everyone's grandmother, it is that personal connection that many people felt they had with her, even though, as you said, they don't know her, they may never have met her, but it's the familiarity, perhaps.
I think when you have a figure like that that's sort of constantly, you know, pictured and on your TV screen and there for all the big national moments, it's really difficult not to have some sense of relatability to it. And also the royal family is designed in some ways for us to be able to relate to them, you know, whether it's kind of like holidays or, weddings or births. We're supposed to have that kind of sense that they are a bit like us. So I think that emotion is really palpable at this moment in time, and it does feel like somebody that has gone, and that's why you are seeing this strong reaction. I don't know if you saw that Theresa May was also, and she's been clipped, and she was also in the line, sort of joining everybody else. And she had quite a grief-stricken face as well. And this is somebody who was in public eye, frontline politics for a very long time. And I don't think you can underestimate just how much emotion the Queen can evoke. Even now, and how traumatic it does feel for people, even those who are in close proximity to her, who's supposed to have a bit of a stiff upper lip, really. You'd expect that of Theresa, certainly.
Yeah, you definitely would, wouldn't you? Not necessarily someone who wears a heart on the sleeve.
Yeah, it's quite funny, actually. Not terribly funny, but before I left to come here, my daughter, who's only 6, I was putting her to bed, and all of a sudden she started crying, and I thought it was because I was making her go to bed, and I was like, what's wrong? And she came up beside me, and she was, at school today there was pictures of the Queen everywhere, and I found it very upsetting. And she's only 6.
But it's probably one of the first conversations she's had about death, about some of these really...
And she asked lots of questions about it, yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
When I came down here for the first time on Sunday, I overheard a conversation by a girl probably about the same age with her mum, and she was asking questions like, how does the Queen get up to the sky? And it's processing that very public sort of mourning as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, as I say, she's only 6, but she had only ever known the Queen, and the Queen was on Peppa Pig and all these types of things, Paddington Bear, so they, in a strange way, even at that age, they could relate to the Queen, and the idea that she's no longer there, even at that age, I think they find it upsetting.
Yeah, it's true. Let's go to the Metro now, shall we, who are also focusing on some of what the Prince and Princess of Wales said at Sandringham. Don't cry, you'll start me off. And then the very emotional, personal conversation he had, saying that what happened going behind the Queen's coffin brought back a few memories.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well. The Queen herself, I think, came from a generation where the royals didn't really emote. They didn't share their feelings terribly much at all. Whereas, obviously, William's from a different generation, and it's almost second nature. They feel comfortable. It helps them to relate to members of the public. And yeah, I mean, it must be quite difficult for him, I would have thought. He's 25 years now, and he's having to basically retrace the same steps that he took as a little boy behind his mum's coffin, having to do that again 25 years later. You can understand why it brings back pretty
those
tough
images
memories.
of the two boys, the two young boys, 1997, going behind the coffin, it was incredibly traumatic, wasn't it?
It must have been traumatic for them. And also, given that there's obviously difficulties in their relationship at the moment, hopefully there is something positive from this, and that perhaps their rift can heal a little bit, reminding themselves about what they went through together. But I think there's a wider point here, is that the royal family don't get to have their grief in private. They have to, as it is, have their grief in public. And we were sort of thinking about this earlier, and maybe it's the fact that, they get some solace from the fact that the public shares in their grief. But there must be some downsides with having to, as I say, keep that stiff upper lip.
Yeah, or not. Good on William, actually, for showing a bit of the emotion, perhaps charming with some of the mental health stuff he's done as well. And talking about that very public grief, we're getting some details, aren't we, about the funeral that we're expecting for the Queen, with the Daily Telegraph saying NHS doctors and nurses to walk ahead of the coffin.
Yeah, I think this is a great idea. And, it's important, I think, especially at this time. We've just come through the pandemic. Obviously, we came out and clapped and banged our pots and pans for the NHS, so it's important, I think, that they are recognised in this way. And also, with cost of living crisis, I think there's a risk that it can seem, all this pomp and ceremony might just seem completely out of touch and not chime with what ordinary people are going through. And this, I think, having members of the public walking ahead of the coffin as well and being part of the whole funeral service, I think, is a really good idea. Yeah,
that's a good point, actually, isn't it, about the grandeur and the sort of resplendency of all of the pomp and ceremony against the reality that people are facing as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is that it was the Queen's own request that she wanted not only members of the public at the funeral, so there are people coming in from all over the Commonwealth who've done good works around her realms, but also the fact that I think she does have a real, did have a real sixth sense for this kind of thing. And you saw it in the Olympic Games when she did that little skit with James Bond, and you saw it with the Paddington. But just that sense of actually being inclusive and finding that way to be relatable as a monarch and show that she is connected to her country.
Absolutely no reason to apologise for getting the tenses, because I feel like we're all kind of still processing, getting used to it.
It's still weird not saying Prince Charles.
Yeah,
That's
it is. You have to check yourself almost sometimes.
When you just talked about the Prince and Princess of Wales, my mental image was something else completely.
Yeah, well, it's because we are. It's the new reality, isn't it, that we are looking into now. A couple of other stories to talk about as well, and you picked out the Guardian front page. Trust to lift the fracking ban despite the lack of progress on tremor risks. And I guess this is a reminder that despite the national pause, other news is still kind of rumbling on as well.
Absolutely, and politics as normal has been put on hold, but come next Tuesday, once we're past the funeral, things are going to speed up and return to normal very quickly, and the energy crisis and the government's announcement that they made this time last week, but which hasn't had any coverage really because of the Queen's death, is going to be front and centre. And the fracking ban being lifted was one of the elements of that announcement, which probably didn't get the coverage that it should have done at the time. Now, we were told that day that the British Geological Survey, which was an investigation into potential side effects of fracking, was going to be published last Thursday. That didn't happen for whatever reason. And The Guardian have now seen a leaked copy of it, and it's basically saying that, there is no firm evidence that fracking is safe. But despite that, and despite the fact that the Conservative manifesto says it won't go ahead unless it's proven to be safe, it's still going to go ahead. And that's going to be hugely controversial.
I'm just going to pick out a slight nuance in the Guardian copy here. Having been a former special advisor and probably having to deal with you, Kevin, on the other end of the phone trying to explain this stuff, I'm going to pick out a slight nuance.
So friendly now. The phone calls. Different, very different before. Not seeing the full report and just going off what's in the copy, it's not that it's proven to be unsafe, it's that they don't have enough evidence to say it either way. And I think this creates a catch-22 situation, because if you're not granting more licences for exploration of fracking, then you're never really going to be able to gather the data that gives you the sense of, whether it's a go or no-go. And so it doesn't technically break the Conservative manifesto. If they're going for this drilling and, they start detecting the tremors over 0.5, I think the question would then be legitimate to say, actually, are you really doing this safely? But until we've seen this report in full, I don't think we can make any assumptions. We are in this slightly incredible situation where we have these big policy announcements with lots of questions remaining, and there's been no scrutiny so far. I mean, I guess, like you said, that's going to change pretty quickly. Yeah, I think we're going to get an announcement or a debate, at least in Parliament, maybe Wednesday or Thursday next week. I mean, the other element of it is that companies, the private sector, businesses have been told that they will get an equivalent scheme to the one that's been announced for households. But there's no details. We don't know when it's going to come in, and businesses are needing to make decisions now as to what deals they sign up for over the winter, and it could mean lots of them go out of business. So that is one thing that the government needs to come up with pretty quickly. It's actually not just even about the fact that businesses are facing hardship. It's actually we don't know how we're going to pay for any of this, and that is really problematic. Or how much it'll cost. Or how much it'll cost. It's a blank check at the minute, isn't it? Yeah. Right. So we need some detail on this pretty fast. Well, we'll wait and see, won't we? And like you say, I think the pressure will be on once next week comes around. I do want to talk to you about the Daily Mirror front page, because this is it says mother's heartbreak, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. The story there, good night, Olivia, love you. The mum of Olivia Pratt, who of course was the little girl who was killed in Liverpool, saying, I will never say goodbye, but what I will say is good night. I mean, it's just a heartbreaking story. I think the initial news was, of course, really shocking. But when you look at the pictures of, this small pink hearse going into a church, it actually makes it so much more real. And seeing her mother, cuddling her toys and things like that, it's probably some of the most heartbreaking pictures you'll see in tomorrow's papers. And it's pleasing that the police have made progress with arrests, but I don't think it's going to be much comfort for her mother. No, I mean, obviously we're talking about
another funeral which is coming up on Monday, but this, it stops you in your tracks, really. As you say, when you saw the carriage carrying the tiny little coffin into the church, I mean, see, as a parent, and you don't even have to be a parent, just be a human being, really, to know how awful this story is and how devastating it is for our family. And you just hope that they get justice. I mean, it will never bring Olivia back, tragically. You know, such a young life snuffed out. But yeah, you just hope that, as I say, they'll get some kind of justice. But it's just a heartbreaking story.
Yeah, the report earlier, I thought the comment by someone saying that, you know, a coffin should never be that small was actually really did sum up, didn't it? You know, this is a 9-year-old girl, and the other thing that has really struck me is just how eloquent her mother has been today, in the face of the most enormous grief. She really has been so eloquent in talking about her daughters. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, I just don't know how you would ever cope with it, really. And for it to happen in such a tragic way, you know, snuffed out so quickly and needlessly and violently, is just horrific. And as I say, you know, hopefully someone will be brought to justice.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, certainly. Right, let's move on to the next story, shall we? This is about bankers' bonuses, so it's more politics. And this is the Daily Star, which has been quite known for its political coverage recently, hasn't it? The headline there, "Pray for the poor millionaire bankers." And this is the story, of course, about the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, reportedly changing the rules which were designed to cap bankers' bonuses. What do you think about this politically, then?
So there was a reason bankers' bonuses were capped back in the day, and it's largely because, you know, the banks were responsible for a recession and a crash back in 2008, and the government had to take on the banks, and we, the taxpayer, were paying for them. And so that's why bankers' bonuses were brought in. I think it's very hard politically to sell a message in such difficult times that actually you're going to let people who can earn a lot of money earn a lot more money when everybody else is struggling. I think, you know, the Chancellor may wish to explain his logic if he does go through with this plan and say that he wants to bring in as much investment and as much money as possible. I think that he is going to have to work really hard to offset that with people being angry about the fact that, you know, there is going to be that much inequality in the way that people are being treated.
It's a politically risky move, to say the least, isn't it, to do this, as you say. Is this about the new government's policy about just going for growth at all costs, doing everything they think is they've got in their arsenal to get growth?
Yes, in a word. I mean, yeah, they've said, and Liz Truss said during the Tory leadership contest that she wanted to break with the Treasury orthodoxy, and yeah, they're going all in, basically, to try and go for growth. But, you know, I can just about see the economic argument to it. I don't think it would actually raise that much money, but it's about sending a message that the UK is open for business. It's the same reason why they've said no more to have an extra windfall tax on the energy firms. But politically, you know, trying to sell this to people at a time when, you know, they don't know how they're going to pay their next gas bill, but they're going to just lift the bonuses on people who already, or lift the cap and bonus on people who already earn huge salaries. I mean, whether they're just trying to get all this tough stuff out the way quickly now and then they can move on. I mean, in a way you could say it's a little bit refreshing having come from Boris Johnson, who was so populist, who wouldn't do anything that might possibly cost them votes. Now we've gone the other way. You know, it doesn't seem like they care at the moment about potentially taking a hit in the opinion polls. And I guess they're just banking on economic growth and that will bring them through at the other end.
Which is a gamble in itself, though, right? Because every government wants growth, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can get it, right?
No.
This is a unique situation, though, because it's in the context of Brexit. So we know that our financial sector, which is responsible for a huge part of the economy, and the financial sector is, you know, above 10% of GDP, is at risk from centres like Paris and Frankfurt. And in order to stem the flow of that hemorrhaging of that talent, this seems like a very good thing to do. But it is going to be a really tough sell politically. So I do agree, you know, maybe they're trying to get the hard stuff out of the way quickly in order to try and build it up for later. Build up some capital for later.
We've just got a couple of minutes, so let's have a quick look, shall we, at the Matt cartoon on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Always worth looking at Matt cartoon. It's one of my favourite sort of points in the paper. And today he is sketching out the final journey for King Charles's leaky pen. He got very frustrated out yesterday, didn't he? Were you sympathetic with King Charles, for rustling with his pen in the way he did?
I mean, a little
Come on.
bit. No, that was,
It was
yeah, because
fine.
it was so weird. I mean, he could have said a lot worse than stinking. I thought it'd have been a great story if he had, but yeah.
And made the front page of the HuffPost UK.
But I mean, I also felt sorry for the courtiers or whatever you call them, who were obviously just desperate for everything to go perfectly. And as soon as he starts kicking off at that, they leap in and take the pen off him and clean it up and what have you. And
Yeah, but I'm sorry, Kevin, you'd be the first person to have a go if he was covered in ink when he came out. Sort of saying that,
My
exactly.
favourite point about that was him admitting he'd been signing the wrong date. Which
Yeah.
I kind of no one's really picked up on, but I mean,
they're probably frightened to tell him that he was
what's the
signing
day of the
wrong
week?
Well, he's king, he can do what he likes.
And he's been through it. I mean, the serious point is, he's obviously, his mum's just died and he's been in the public glare and he's not stopped for a second, and it's probably understandable that he kicks off about something.
Absolutely right. Really interesting to talk. We'll have more from you. Thank you so much to our two guests, political commentator Salma Shah, political editor of the HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield.